There we go. And welcome. This is going to be a super small class because everybody kind of went to, it's just you, Saber now. Everybody else went to the data science one. So it's cool. It's really good to have a small class. We can kind of, have a more tailored experience and just go over the things that are important. And of course, have a better discussion. When we have many people, usually it's less interactive, but if just a small group, it's going to be easier. The idea of today is to introduce Django, which is, as you know, a really important, a really cool framework. The problem with Django is that it has too many moving parts. First, it's a big monolithic framework that was designed 10 years ago with a completely different web in mind. So when Django came to live, web was completely different. It was just a static notion of the web with a lot of client server interaction, with ugly hooks to get some real time, with Ajax, with doing long polling, doing things that were just hacks to get a better experience for the client. And today, of course, the web has changed. So the Django people have tried to accommodate to those changes. So sometimes there are things that are kind of how to put it, duct taped, and they're not extremely well crafted, or at least they were not thought with that intention at the beginning. So that's when things start to get a little bit more complicated and it doesn't make a lot of sense. So the idea is to give you guys a good introduction to it and also help you understand these corners, these difficulties that you might find. Django is a huge framework, and we will also focus a lot in different concepts that are important for web development, not just Django as a tool. Our idea is that everything you learn here, you will be able to transfer them to, I don't know, Rails or any other framework you might use at any point, because they all work kind of in the same way. And also, Django is huge. It has so many modules, so many apps. So it's impossible to go over all that in just 1 month. So what we want to give you is a really good understanding of the fundamentals, the principles behind it, the design decisions behind it. So then when you need to learn something else, it just falls into the right place and you can kind of learn it on your own, especially because it is constantly evolving. So at some point it will change. There are actually big changes planned. Django channels is one of them. And again, maybe in 5 years from now, we are in a completely different state. So if we are just transferring you tools, it's something that gets old really quickly. We will try to give you all the contents. And also, and so to get started, kind of with the basics, requirements that we need, or knowledge that we kind of need, it's just that week you guys had about Flask and HTTP. But if that doesn't make sense, if that's not extremely clear, if you don't remember about it, if you haven't worked a lot of it and you haven't kind of solidified it, then just go ahead and ask about it. It's totally fine. We are doing Django if you want, web development with Django as the title, but it's perfectly fine to ask something about HTTP again, or any fundamental, because again, the tool, Django is the tool, the concepts are the important things. And again, there are so many moving parts. Doing web development is hard because when something breaks, you don't know if it's your web server, if it's your network connection, if it's the networking layer, if it's the framework, if it's the code, if it's a client. There are so many moving parts that are all working together, and it's really, really, really hard to put in place. So again, questions are more than welcome. I need to update that repo that you have, Saber, in the one you clone. It's going to be useful still. You can pull later. But we are simplifying things a little bit. For example, we have included a make file, and a few other things will make your life easier. And this project is actually right here. I need to update it in the platform with also a practice that I'm going to give you later. So this is just, where is the chat here? There you go. So that is the one that I'm gonna start with today, and you will see these make file structure, this is what's gonna simplify the work later.
Okay.
And of course, we're gonna cover all these as we make progress. So the idea again is to go do a quick summary of all the technologies that we have that we're involving in this process and try to go over the concepts especially. So let me browse, I could say, for example, we can browse python.org. And our biggest job here will be, again, to understand how these things work behind the scenes, aside from the framework. So in this case, and again, to kind of get us started, the important thing about web development is that it's working on top of HTTP, which is, as you might remember, a client-server architecture. So that means that clients will initiate communications. They will be the ones initiating the communication by making a request. We used to name this thing a request. And servers are only responding with a response. So there's going to be a request and there's going to be a response, right? So the only way that a server has to communicate with a client is throughout a response. So it can never initiate the communication just by the server with the regular HTTP plain old architecture, right? We have a few hacks to overcome this, and also there are things like, for example, WebSockets and few other things, server push, that will allow you to change this architecture and basically have the server pushing things to the client. But of course, that's a little bit more complicated. We're focusing on the basics first. So in this case, my browser is the one initiating the communication. I am making the request by typing the URL. There is this interaction traveling behind the scenes. If I open here my Chrome developer tools and I replay these requests, you will see actually many requests. But if I open this request right here, right, this is the initial one that I made. I said I want to get, right? I made a get request. So it's going to be, in this case, we're going to let me clear this out. It's going to be a get to, in this case, python.org, and the path, the resource, it's going to be just /empty root, the root location of this server. And the server is responding with something later for me, so it's just doing that later. With this request, this is a get request. And remember, we have many different types: get, post, put, patch, delete, head options. There are many more. Not many more, but there are a few more. And the idea was that you were basically expressing an action that you want to perform: get, post, put, delete, etc., on a resource. So these were the two most important things. You have the resource, right here. In this case, it's a root one. And in this case, you also have a get method. So for example, if I browse, I don't know, about. In this case, the resource is /about, right? And I'm still doing a get request. When the browser browses a web page, when it follows the links, when you manually type a URL in your browser, it's sending a get request. And then the server is answering with, in this case, we can set response. Oh, there you go. /about get. The response is going to be, I don't know why I cannot see the source code of the response. But basically, the response is 200, status code, 200, OK. And then you have the whole body of the HTML of the response. So when we do our Django development, we are basically putting a big layer. I want you now to imagine this thing as we're looking it from above, right? So I'm changing or transposing this drawing that I've made, and we have, in this case, it's going to be this whole thing is kind of this thing right here. So you have my lines are drawn right here, right? So this is your server, and this is your client. I don't know how to draw 3D. But the idea is that this is going to be only one layer, which is HTTP, right? Basic HTTP. And then you have some stuff below this level. And in this case, it's going to be all the stack related to networking, plus your operating system, etc. And we will be putting a big layer on top, which is Django. So Django will let us simplify this process. You could do these with bare Python, just literally parsing the strings and manually working with this. But of course, it's extremely inconvenient. So that's why we are creating these layer, the Django layer, which is the framework on top. Make sense? Questions?
Yeah, it makes sense. But I am kind of curious on how to figure out how to do it with just Python manually. Because last summer, I had a friend that was offering me a project that his company was trying to find people for. And they were pretty much, they had a server that they wanted to pull information and create pretty much a web front for. But he wanted to make sure that I could get to the server using some kind of language. He wanted me to use Erlang.
Erlang?
And yeah, and I was still studying Python, so I was trying to figure it out with Python, but I never could figure it out.
But the question is if by doing it manually with Django, it's something that you need to do. So a few things you can, for example, simulate with Python and Django. You can simulate these process with. Let me pull it up here.
Well, what's
With
the best way
Python,
to test it? That's pretty much where I'm getting at.
to test what, the connection in this case.
Yeah, before a
So
platform is actually built.
this given, in this case, the client, right, is my
Right.
browser, but you can have many clients. You can have a phone, you can have a smartwatch, you can have a literally a fridge, door, that they are communicating with a given server. And in this case, you can also do the same requests with Python. So for example, port requests, this thing, and this is going to give you a response. So you make the request, it's going to lag for a bit, and then you get the response back. So I'm going to get the response. And here I just simulated this thing. Requests was the client that made this request. So basically when I hit the return key here, initiating a new request, the same thing was done here. I initiated the request and the server responded with a response. And in this response, yep.
Can you put an IP address in there instead of a URL?
Yes, of course. Yeah, it's just domain names are just like fancy layers on top of IP addresses.
Right.
So yeah, definitely you can just do an actually ping. Let's ping python.org, and you can get the URL. I don't know if this is gonna work so simple because we are not sending the host. Yep, didn't work. But because this server is not configured, right, to work on that. No, yeah. But again, you're definitely able to do it. And in this case, where you're getting is basically the same thing that my browser received, but my browser chose to display the whole information. In this case, this is what I have in my response variable, this one, response, which is a 200, okay? And I can get, for example, a response.status code, which I know, 200. Response.headers, what headers were sent by the server. So for example, if we check here, what headers did my browser, one type of these clients got? Response headers, I don't know, accept ranges, bytes. Let's see if we see it somewhere. I don't know if we can find it. Accept ranges, byte. So I don't know, these parameters that are kind of repeated, I don't know if we have them. Yeah, we have the same one here. So again, it's like you are basically simulating a browser. You're simulating a client making a request to a server. And this is a really important thing, because when we start working with APIs, this is going to be the usual way that you communicate with an HTTP, with a Django app or with an API. You make requests and receive responses from a machine client. It's not a human browsing a website, but it's pretty much the same thing. So again, the idea of Django is that it's going to sit on top of these web architecture that it's working. It's been working for 30 years now, and it's going to sit on top of this, and it's going to ease our process to get, you know, websites working faster. I don't know, what do you guys remember about Flask? We did a quick introduction to it, but it's going to look a lot similar. And the important thing is to understand this request response cycle, this request response dance that clients and servers are going to have, and we will need to replicate it also with Django. So how things start, this is something important that it's kind of dumb, but it's super important. At this point, you are trying to model a website, for example. If you're working with Django to build websites, you are modeling your websites with a given structure, which is usually kind of a tree structure. And we usually call this thing a sitemap. So you're usually saying, well, my website is going to have, for example, I don't know, about, we just saw. It's going to have, what else? I don't know. It's going to have downloads, a downloads page. So it's going to be /download, so people can download things. And it's going to have, I don't know, /docs, right? So you're just planning the website you're going to build. And then you will start realizing that the nature of these different things is going to change. So for example, download for Windows or download for Mac OS, you will see that they are pretty similar. Download /Mac OS X, download /Windows. Python releases for Windows, Python releases for Mac OS X. So it kind of looks, it's pretty much the same page. I haven't seen the source code of this website, but it's pretty much the same page. And the only thing that they are changing are the titles that you are seeing here, but the styles are the same, the menu is the same, the copy is pretty much the same, changing the operating system. Everything is pretty much the same thing. So some of these URLs, you will see that they are kind of all sharing something. You're going to say, we're going to have the root of download, the index page of all the downloads. So if I hit here, downloads, this is a special one. But then we're going to have one of them, and here you're having like a sub-level, right? One for Windows, one for Linux, one for Mac, right? So, and these, they all share kind of the same view and the same logic. So what you will be doing is trying to reuse as much as you can of that logic, right? So that's how everything starts. It starts basically with URLs. Django has many moving parts, and this is the first project that we're starting with Django. Let me show you a few things. First, I'm going to show you a regular directory structure in my operating system, and I want you to see it live in GitHub, because it's at the beginning, it's weird the way the directories are structured. So here we have first sample project. This is the name that I gave it. Usually you give it, of course, a more meaningful name. In this case, we could have called it, I don't know, python.org. You are going to have, then you will see another directory within this one with the same name. This is confusing, by the way. And then you're going to see this app thing. And this app thing, sample app in this case, there you go. These apps will be the ones that will do most of the work in our Django apps. All right, so a Django project will be a set of configuration and files that serve kind of the greater purpose. It's going to be just general configuration. And then you're going to have different apps to give live to your project. So for example, in the python.org, we could have an app only for downloads. We can have another app only for documentation. You can have another app only for users, only for jobs. Whatever makes sense. You're just breaking your big website into smaller apps, you know, so you can just concentrate in one unit of work and one module, and it's not just a huge, gigantic application with all together. So again, something is going to be related to the project structure. It's usually within the name of the project, and it's going to be repeated. And most of the live things you will see, the client's going to see, they are going to be inside the app. Inside sample project, in this particular project, I decided to call this thing sample project. Other projects you have, of course, different names, but inside the project structure, you're going to have, again, general configuration, things that are not usually seen by the client. And we're going to start really slowly to do kind of a tour on our Django app. Everything starts with, conceptually, everything starts with the URLs. You're designing what URLs you're going to expose to the outside world. And with that, you're going to see this urls.py file. This is something that it's generated whenever you start a project. In this case, the project is already started, but it's just to generate this project, I just run literally just 2 commands. Everything else, it's just generated by the Django framework. So in this case, you have the URLs that you will be using to basically generate or replicate this sitemap that you are thinking about. And this is kind of a mixture of business requirements, you know, with some tech. The requirements, the business requirements are going to be, we need to support these URLs and these clients, and we're going to have these dynamic pages here, and these are going to be static. And then you need to, of course, kind of take this thing down into Django URLs, right? So then you're constructing these paths by using this Django function. Sorry, by the way, this urls.py needs to define a variable called URL patterns, and it must be a list. This is the only requirement. So this is what you're going to you're going to define a URL patterns variable with a list of paths. And each one of these paths indicate the URL that you are planning to have later. Make sense? Now, when someone browses that URL, what's going to happen? So when someone initiates a request, when someone just hits the return button here and, you know, is trying to land on this page, what are you going to do, basically? That is the second parameter of path. So the first one is that URL, right? And the second parameter, it's going to be the actual function that we're going to execute whenever this URL is hit. So here we're going to construct kind of a mapping. We could call it kind of a table that it's going to be for this URL. In this case, we have step 1, right? Invoke the Python function step 1. Use this function, you know? And the same thing is going to happen for each one of the step 2, right? Go to step 2, right? And of course, that all these URLs are you can randomly choose them, and the names of the functions are of course something you can pick up. They don't have to have any correlation. I am just trying to keep it simple for these first examples. So it's simple. You define the URLs, and you also define that given function that will take care of processing the request. In this case, for example, this one, the downloads page in python.org, this function will receive the request from the client, build this page. Probably this information is dynamic. Probably it needs to go find it to a database, for example. What is the latest version of Python 2.7? What's the latest version of Python 3.6? This clearly coming from a database, right? Getting all this information, packaging it all in HTML, and returning it. That's what this given function is doing. So in our case, we have step one. If we would be building python.org, here we would have something like downloads, right? And here we're gonna do something like, for example, downloads. Usually the names are similar. And finally, we have a third parameter that is going to be the name of the URL. It's going to be, so this is going to be path. Right here, it's going to be path. And this is going to be the Python function that is going to take care of responding to that client's request. And finally, we have a name. That it's just something that we're going to use to reference the URL if it changes later. So not a big issue for now. All right, so let's take a look at these function. In this case, the function is located inside the views.py module. I could have moved it to any module, my module.py, whatever I wanted to call it. As long as you put here the actual function that it needs to be invoked, that's fine. And of course, if you have two different versions, and this is kind of going back to the import class, how to import things, you can import the whole module and then say views step 1, views step 3, or you can just say something like from views import step 2, and here just put step 2. So again, it's completely up to you. It's pretty much the same thing. We usually prefer to do this version, so you know where they are coming from, but it's completely up to you. And these are the functions that need to be defined to satisfy our requests and responses. And we're gonna try in a second this step 1. As you can think, it's gonna be just a really simple response. Make sense? Questions?
So is this views where you compile the HTML, or is that going to be different?
We are actually going to have it separate. We're gonna separate HTML from views, so we can keep, separate presentation from logic. So something important here, and it's that I mentioned that we have, again, so many moving parts in web development. And in this case, this is just a bunch of Python files. So this is, again, a real website. I'm going to show it to you in a second. But basically, we have one file, 20 lines, another file, how many? 6, 7, 10 usable lines. Everything else is boilerplate. How can we turn these couple of lines into an actual real website? Well, Django has many utility tools, we could say, that will help you, and it will simplify the development process. One of them is spinning a development server. So it's pretty much what we used to do with Flask. In this case, what we will do is, in this case, it's make run server. This is not a really complicated command, but it's kind of verbose. It's this thing right here. So we would just package it in this make file if you want to say it. It's this thing. You don't need to say this. It's just for reference. So when you run that command, there will be an app live, in this case, in the port 8080. And as you can see, this looks ugly, but it's not that, for example, if I go to localhost, whatever, I'm gonna put any number, that it's not working. It's actually working. It's ugly, but it's actually working. And here it's giving you an idea of what's going on in your server. And what's happening here, Django will have this kind of developer mode that will assist you as you're developing. In this case, Django realizes that there is no URL configured. So in our table here, this one, we never thought about it. So this one, nope. How do I raise? So this one right here, we've never thought about it. So that's why we don't have an index page. And again, it's giving you a nice debugging message. And it's actually saying that you're saying it because debug is equals to true. Of course, that in production, we don't want to expose all our stuff. So we will just, in production, we will turn debug to false. Now, let's go to navigate to step 1 and see our first URL in action. So this is what we're doing, basically. We set the step 1 URL saying that whenever someone reaches step 1, we want to execute this function right here. And this function is being executed, and we're just returning a hello world message. Of course, it's extremely simple. We could do anything that we want here, right? We can, I don't know, go fetch users from database, compute, I don't know, sales, returns. I'm just making stupid examples up. But you can do anything you want. These right here, this is just regular Python code. Django took care of executing your function, and giving you the option to just write Python code. This is what you know how to do. You can just write your code right here. Now, the response, in this case it says HTTP response. The response that we need to return, again, it's kind of a structured thing. It's not return a string, for example. You need to return a HTTP response option. So this is just a regular Python class, and we're creating an instance of this response, and we're passing the content of the response. You can, of course, simulate HTML within the view. So related to your question, Xavier. So in this case, in step 2, we're basically returning HTML, but of course it's not gonna be the preferred way because we don't want thousands of lines of HTML within our functions. Makes sense, the cycle, how things are invoked, etc.
Yeah, so far so good.
Awesome. So usually, your Django app will be, again, this is going to be the front-facing function that you have. It's going to be the function that takes requests from clients and returns responses, builds responses with, I don't know, pulling data from a database, pulling data from external sources, consulting APIs, doing business logic, and finally returning a response. This, again, front-facing function, it's kind of special. Then in your app, you're going to have something like, I don't know, we're going to do utils.py here, utils.py, and then you will need to compute something. I don't know. You will need to def get last long-term support version, right? So you're going to have a function that it's kind of utility. It's not meant to face the outside world. It's a regular Python function as you know it. It takes some parameters, returns some output, objects, numbers, strings, etc. So we usually have we give a different name to differentiate the functions that are just meant for internal work and those functions that are meant for the outside world, those functions that receive requests from clients and return responses. These ones are usually called views. That's why it's within views.py. It's a regular Python function, plain old Python function, but conceptually for us, this function is taking care again of satisfying a client's request. What else? Well, immediately we can start returning templates. So the core of a website is, of course, returning an HTML template. So in this case, we're gonna do render. This step 3, let me just show it to you first. Step 3, we're rendering this template, and the template we're rendering is basically this thing. And I can actually show it to you. You can see what the framework return. We are doing a simple HTML structure, and inside we are dynamically rendering a list of books, right? So this is a clear example of something being dynamically built. In your real website, you will probably pulling these from the database, right? So it's similar to this procedure right here, where Python is, it has in a database, it has a list of all the previous releases, and then when you access this page, it's building those releases, right? By pulling them from the database and building dynamically the HTML. So we're combining the HTML with that dynamic data. But similar to Flask, Django also has template language, which is the one we're accessing here. So for example, we are rendering these given templates. So this is the way we do it. We import from shortcuts the render function, and then we do render request. You always need to put the request. We're gonna see a lot about these in a second. Then you specify which HTML template you want to render, and then you pass a context. You pass information. In the case of Python, it's going to be, for example, the latest Python 2 version, the latest Python 3.6 version, a list with all the templates. I don't know, what else? Release schedules, a list with all the schedules. So all these things that are dynamic are being pulled from the database and merged, if you want, with the template, with the HTML structure that it's built.
Did you say that the data for the template is known as the context?
These data, yes, this is usually called context.
And that just means data that goes in the template?
Yep, pretty much. Actually, if we look I don't know if I can see the documentation of these. No. They usually call it context, yes. Yeah, it's kind of a regular function. It's called a function that it's facing the real world is a view. Conceptually, it's Python. It's not a difference in terms of technically what they are in Python. It's just for us. So yeah.
You know, I gotta say that's kind of weird and confusing, because the data should be content, right? And maybe the template logically would be a context. I accept what you're saying. I'm just gonna look it up, and it might be some more of those backwards things.
Yeah, I don't know why they named it actually. No, context. Django render. Rendering a context. Yeah, I don't know. You have a fair point. I don't know why they call it that way. So again, you're basically packaging the information. You're pulling from some source and rendering the template. The template, of course, needs to specify the general structure you're going to have. So in this case, you have all these things are kind of fixed, static. Book list, it's a title. It's just static HTML we're rendering. Book count is static. The number is dynamic. So here, this number is passed as a context. So for example, I'm going to pass By the way, my context, it's just a regular dictionary. So let me kill this key that looks confusing. It's just a regular dictionary, key value, as you know it. It's a regular plain old Python dictionary. In this case, I have a key, which is an entire list, and then I have another key, which is just a plain, simple integer. And I'm going to call this thing 5, for example. I'm going to give it the value 5. I'm going to render this thing again, and you see that it's updated. And the idea is, again, we're combining something that it's static, that's a legend, it's a title, with something that it's dynamic. You know, so in this case, count is dynamic, and you can access those things that were passed by the view as context with double curly braces. You put double curly braces and you access the count. And I hope that you guys remember this, but this is pretty much the same thing as doing simple string formatting with Python. You know, the count is, and in this case, the syntax changes a little bit, but then you do format and you say count equals count, or 5, whatever. So in that case, you have a static part in your template, and you also have a dynamic part in your template, and you're rendering this thing with these given context in this case. The template language is, of course, it's incredibly powerful. It's not about just replacing values. You can express for loops, you can express if statements. You're going to see that it's really powerful. So in this case, we are also passing a list of books. It just super simplify a list of books, each one of them represented as a simple string. And then we iterate over that list all within the template and just type the names of the books right there. So that's why we see these, each one of these is a new li element. Make sense? Questions?
I'm good.
Awesome. So as I told you, this is going to be the most difficult thing about Django is how to split your work in different apps. So it's simple to reuse functionality. You don't get completely lost with 1,000 different apps, but you don't end up with millions of lines of code in the same file either. You know, like it's really hard to draw that line and say, I will split this thing into 2 things. But usually in a high level, you can think about different applications in any website: documentation, downloads, community, all the news, events. So these are kind of different things. So you can structure them in Django by thinking about them in apps, right? The first one we're going to start with, it's the only one we have in this repo. It's a simple application, sample app it's called. And it's just this directory with this special structure that it might not make a lot of sense now. It will later. And then you will want to combine all your URLs from different apps, because apps are of course serving different URLs. So for example, here, documentation is going to be serving their own views, events, news. Each one of them will have different URLs to serve. So then you want to combine them all in this center place, which is again within, and this is the confusing part. I hate this because it's super, I see how you guys can get confused later. We have the regular project. This is kind of the whole thing. Sample project, it contains all our apps. So think about here, customers, documentation, downloads, community, events, one directory for each one of those apps. And then there is one special one that it's a general configuration directory. It's going to be sample project. It's called the same way as the outermost one. And it has a big urls.py file within this one. This is the central #1 king of kings, you know, urls.py. And then you can kind of build a tree and start branching other urls.py. So in this case, you can have customer.urls, and you can say, for example, all that it's within customers should be served by customers.urls. We're going to do here that. And all the things that are downloads are downloads, there we go, are going to be served by downloads.url. So you're, again, branching each one of these sub applications or these applications you have, and you're allowing them to define their own URLs. So you're including the URLs file for them. So let me go back again in time. There you go, should work. And we're defining all these URLs in another file. Let me see if it didn't break. By the way, this is again the server that we're running, so you will get familiar with that. And then here the URLs that we're defining, it's simple. We're going to start seeing them one by one because we have a few interesting things. First of all, it's authors, right? So we are browsing all the different authors that we have in our database. In this case, we don't have a database. We have just the information hard-coded in the view, but again, you are probably pulling this from a database. And this view is extremely simple. It's just one line. Render this template with this context. Authors is basically this information we have right here. The template authors, you can check it out, is just a regular list, you know, for we are iterating a dictionary, so we're doing items, you know, just invoking things. You can see with these examples that we're running how powerful the template engine is, because in this case, for example, each author is a dictionary, so you can access a dictionary's key by just doing authors dot and the name of the key. You can compute the length of a dictionary or a list or a string with the length thing here. It's going to be filter. We're going to see more about that later. So you can see how powerful the template processing language is. But again, our simple going back again to where we started. Our process is simple. Our view is simple. We define the URL, and we then define a function that it's going to take care of rendering something when the user accesses that view. In this case, we are just rendering an authors.html template, and that's it. Second view that we have is authors filtered, and I'm gonna show it to you how it works first, and then we're gonna see. I'm gonna leave this one here. Filtered. If you don't pass any parameter, it pretty much gives you the same authors we had before, but it will allow you to filter this and say, for example, Q where the author has PO in its name, or just PO, for example. And it's gonna filter and will show you only this author right here. How are we doing that in the view? And the key here is gonna be the request thing that you're receiving. So every view, you've seen it already, all the views we did that we used before, I didn't pay a lot of attention to it, but every view was receiving this request. These two views were doing pretty much nothing, so it was worthless, sorry. The render method receives the request, so here we were just proxying it, we were just forwarding the request, we didn't even care about it. But usually you will care about the request, because a request has the information that your client is passing to you. So in this case, as a user, myself, as a human user browsing a website, I am passing information with this URL. I'm saying, hey, I want to search for these authors. You know, I'm passing a query parameter saying I want to search for these authors. In that case, the question is, how do you access these parameters right there, right? And that is going to be within the request object, and it's going to be the .get parameter. So request.get, and that's going to be a huge dictionary that contains all the different parameters that are being passed. We actually have something prepared. 80, my bad. There you go. It's kind of a way for us to introspect the request. So for example, I am passing two parameters. So for example, hello and goodbye. And I can see those arguments within my request. But important thing here is how we access them. It's going to be a request.get, and I can, you know what I can do? I can just print this thing. And let's do old style debugging. I can print, I'm going to pass another parameter. I'm going to say who Python and what time tomorrow, making things up. And then you will see right here, do you get to see this? You get to read it? This is that get thing. So this request.get is basically this thing right here. It's a dictionary containing the Q is PO, who, Python, what time, tomorrow. So you have a dictionary with whatever the user passes a key and whatever value the user passed, whatever key you have and the value for that key. Make sense? So then our view, it's just super simple. It's about filtering this dictionary based on the name of the author and the parameter Q that the user passed. So in this case, we say, if the user passed a Q argument, we're going to get that Q argument. Again, it's just a regular dictionary. And we're going to say, if the query is not in that author, skip over it, continue, simple. And in other case, we just add it to the list that we're going to show later. Dictionary, not list. Make sense? Another way of...
So yeah. When you do the request there, is it always returning a dictionary object named query dict? Like what you printed?
Can you repeat? If you start with...
Like when you added in those bogus arguments and then you showed the console what it printed, it returned something called query dict, right? So is that always coming in as named that and as a dictionary?
So the request.get is basically this query dictionary, which has pretty much the same interface as a dictionary, but it actually has a few differences. For example, it will allow repeated values, but it has the same interface as a dictionary.
Okay. Is it ordered?
Really good question. I don't know. Huh. That's a good question, because I think it shouldn't be ordered, to be honest. I think here it's just a nice coincidence, because conceptually for your app, it shouldn't make sense if a user, puts Q equals, this happens a lot with Google, when you Google Python language, right? When you Google something, you see the parameter, your query. This is super important. Passing information in the GET request, it's extremely important. Basically the whole business model of Google is looking up things, and the way you're passing that information is just with the query language. And then you have all the other parameters, of course. But I don't think that the order internally matters. It's just, I don't think it internally matters. But I don't know, to be honest, if this dictionary is ordered. It's a good question. We can look it up later. So another way of passing information, which might seem silly, is what we were using, for example, here when we were doing downloads, for example, for Mac or download for a Windows computer. So you're telling the website that you have a Windows computer or that you want to download something for Windows. You're giving information to the website by just specifying the correct URL. And this happens all the time. These URLs are usually dynamic. So for example, Windows and macOS, again, they are pretty much, I changed. They are pretty much the same thing, /Windows /macOS. But they are rendering something different. So this is usually, but we're gonna do pretty much the same thing. What we can do here, we can say, for example, the author Poe or author Borges, right? And we have two different views that look pretty much the same. And what are we doing? Are we defining two more views here manually, /Poe, you know, and it's gonna be handle Poe, and another guy here /Borges, you know, and another view. And for each author you add your URL, you're gonna have a new URL configuration. Of course, that doesn't scale. These are dynamic URLs that are generated after a given configuration. And that is super simple. You're just gonna say, given author / and you're gonna use these as a placeholder. You're gonna say, and here you're gonna receive a slug that is the name of the guy, basically, right here. And then your view will receive that parameter as a regular function parameter. So author detail, sorry, it's gonna receive name as a real parameter. Super extremely simple. So then you can just get that given author by the name and render it. Of course, you pass something that it doesn't exist, you're gonna have a 404 not found. In this case, we don't see it, but it's a 404 not found because of that. Make sense? These parameters, or the way to specify URLs and parameters, changed in Python 2. And in Django 2.0. I don't know if you know it, but Django changed the version, I don't know how long ago, but I would say 6 months, maybe. They released Django 2.0, and they added this new path thing, which is kind of a different way of what we used to do it before. Before, you used to define this as a regular expression, which was incredibly ugly. So they became more beginner friendly and or actually, for sanity of us all, they gave us this way of defining URLs as more, I don't know, expressive placeholders. So in this case, you can say slug, or for example, you can say an integer. And in this case, it's gonna be author by ID 1, for example. It's gonna render the same page as before, but here, author detail ID, it's gonna receive the ID of the author, which needs to be an integer. And these things, your value. So it's parsing, this is a big string, right? It's getting this chunk of the string, tiny, it's still a string, and then it's parsing it into an integer for you. So this thing, author ID, is basically
So what is slug exactly?
Slug is usually a string that doesn't have spaces. Usually, if you have, so for example, you have hello world, slug is usually hello world, you know, separated by dashes without uppercase. Usually, this is considered to be a slug. It changes the definition, but it's kind of that way. It's a URL-friendly string, basically.
Yeah, it's the term used for the URL of a page. So in blogging, you would have like an article title, but you could turn the slug into something that was shorter or completely different if you wanted to. And as he said, no spaces.
Yeah. It's URL friendly. It's usually used for search engine optimization too. So you want to give the right keywords there, right, Mike? I think that's usually the idea. But technically, anything that's URL friendly matches as a flag. What else? Another way of, so you're saying that these views, they have a fancy name, view, but it's pretty much a regular Python function, right? The only special thing about them is that they receive the request that we, first of all, we never manually invoke it. We never did, oh, I'm gonna call this function author, detail ID. I never manually invoke it. Django is doing it behind the scenes for me. I'm just saying this is the view and Django is invoking it. Second, again, they are receiving the request and they are also returning a response. They are always returning a response. That's the way. And actually, what view do I have here? Author by ID. If I don't return this thing, I just leave it blank, it's gonna say, dude, you have to return an HTTP response object. It's mandatory. Again, regular Python function. And usually you know that your Python functions might have optional parameters or parameters by default. And you can also simulate that with your views. So the third argument, we used to have the name. I'm putting another argument between the function and the name, which is a dictionary with default argument. So I'm just saying, for example, this view, let me show it to you first. It's going to be author as list. This view will display an author in regular form. And this other one is going to render it with a table view. It's pretty much the same thing, but it's doing it with a table view. The function is the same. The function is this one right here. It's always pulling the author from the name or by the name and rendering a template. The logic is changing a little bit based on the display option you want to do. See, so if you want to do display equal list, the template you're going to choose is detail. If you want to do table, you're going to choose detail table. So you're just changing the way that you're displaying the information. The information is the same for both. So the only difference is going to be author detail table. It's going to be just how you display the information. Again, the information is the same. And this parameter display, you can change it in your views. So it's the same function. Check out these two URLs, step 8 and 9. It's the same function, but in this case, we're sending display to list, and in this case, we're saying display to table. And again, with all that, we have our request info. That's kind of a summary of many different things we will end up saying throughout the course that are, for example, what's the method that we're using to send this request? Get. What's the path? It's the one we can see. The content type, text plain. The request argument. So we did something here. Hello world. Hello, it's going to be one of them. All the headers that were sent. So my browser is sending headers. All these headers are also shared. So this is all the information that the client is sending when it's sending the request initially. So information provided by the client, and usually if we could separate, so this information that it's sending the client, we can separate it into kind of two things. One of them is going to be things that the human behind the browser, we could say, is actually sending. For example, in my Google search, right, when I was doing, where is my search? I provided this parameter, but for example, all the headers that are sent by the request are usually provided by the browser. The user, the human being seated across the computer, has no idea about all these headers that are being sent. So again, there's a part of it that it's being sent but you're actually important user, and there is something sent by the browser. Questions? So this was kind of a good overview of the whole request response cycle, and with pretty much so our main focus here was dealing with the request, right? Parsing, get parameters, receiving things in the form of URLs, etc. We will slowly also start to give it a little bit more meaning. I don't know how to put it, but more consistency and more detail to the responses that we're returning. Up to this point, we're just rendering templates, and at some point we will want to change that, especially when we start using APIs. Another simple way of returning a response is, for example, with a redirect, right? So you know already that some pages can redirect you. So in this case, the all author page, for example, if I go to all author page po, is redirecting me back to author po, right? All author page po redirected back there. If I show you the requests that are being sent, preserve the log. In this case, the browser this is usually interesting. This particular request response cycle was in this way. My browser initiated the response. So we have here we can say here the server is going to be the Django app, and this is going to be here my client. So the server initiated, the client server initiated the response, the request, and said the communication by sending a request and said, I want to get all author page po. Django here realized that there is no longer an all page po because we return in a redirect and we say, no, look, this thing is no longer here. Go look it up at this location, /author/ the username, or actually the last name of the author. So here the response sent by Django was, this thing is no longer here. It's a redirect. Usually the code is 3 something, remember? 301, 302, it's the status code. In this case, 302. So the client said, okay, so it doesn't just settle. The browser didn't stop there. It's the browser here is taking an action on your behalf. It's making a decision, and it's making another request right after the original one. Again, it's behind the scenes. And it's doing now another request and said, okay, I'm not done. I'm gonna try it again. And started another request and said, hey, you just told me that I should go back to go look this thing at authors /po in this case. So it sent another request to a new one. And this one, of course, is correctly processed by the app. The important thing here is, again, your responses can be HTML, or it can also be something different. Again, we're going to start seeing a lot more detail throughout classes with this one. Now, something that happens all the time with websites is that URLs change, right? Usually URLs change. So we try not to hard code URLs in our code. If you hard code the URL right here and you ever need to change one URL, you will need to update every instance of that URL in your code, which is of course not good. So usually what we do is we give these URLs a name, remember, that it's internal. Nobody else sees it. All new developers see this name. So we can reference this URL only by that name. So then marketing people come and say, hey, you know what? We should call this thing awesome author by ID. And you say, no problem, done, changed. Because you're always referencing this view by its original name and not by the URL. And this thing can change again. And how can you reference that? Well, instead of manually returning the URL and building the string of the URL with Python, you can use these utility methods, for example, the reverse one. So let me extract this thing. So URL is going to be that. So you can just do URL. Let's see if it works. All author page. Redirect. Return redirect to the URL. There you go. Sorry, something wasn't working. And basically what you're saying is reverse the URL with this name, author detail. Let me look it up. Detail right here. And the parameter that you should choose is for name, put this name that I have right here. So it's pretty much the same thing we're doing here manually, but in this case, we're using the URL's name and not the manual hard-coded URL. You can do the same thing with templates. So for example, here we have URLs we're generating, author's detail right here. No, authors, sorry, my bad. And here I am manually putting the URL, something that we don't like. So we're gonna introduce another way of doing this. Two things. First of all, the Django template language has comments. This is one way of commenting out code. So these. Basically, this is commenting out some code. I just wanted to show you. But to reverse the URLs in your templates, you will use a template tag. And it's these template tags they start with the curly braces as regular variable substitution, but they also have a percentage sign right after it. So right after it, you have a template tag. And it's, of course, what you see right here. These are a little bit more strange. So here, what you're going to say is, what was the name? It was, it's author, yeah, author detail. And you're going to pass here, for example, a parameter. So you're going to say with the author's lag. You can do that some. Here, so now the URL will keep working. It's still working as before, but we're not hard coding the URL. We are generating it dynamically by giving it the name of the URL that we're looking for and the parameters it receives. And Django is taking care of building the URL behind the scenes. Make sense? Questions? There is a big list of template tags that you guys can use. The philosophy of Python is to keep templates as simple as possible, not to put a lot of logic into them. The idea of the Django people is that templates should be friendly enough for example, designers or product people to manage. So it shouldn't be extremely complicated with a lot of logic for them to understand. So that's why sometimes this template language is going to be limited, but of course you have these template tags that you can use for them. So for example, let me show you a good example really quickly. We're going to do our authors view. We're going to do daytime. I'm gonna do something like, now it's gonna be, I'm gonna do that. And in my template, I'm gonna say something like, I'm gonna put it a big title. So I'm gonna just put right now, the variable that I'm passing. My computer is crazy. There you go. So you see the date. But again, the idea is that, for example, how can you format these correctly in your template? You cannot do a lot of logic inside here. What you will use are these tools that Django is providing. So for example, you have one of them that it's the, where is it? It's below, it's around, sorry, here. So you're gonna say, for these, what do we wanna show? We wanna show, for example, today is Tuesday. Actually, it's already Wednesday for UTC. Wednesday, May, whatever, the 2nd. So we're gonna say today is, and here you're gonna say date, and you're gonna pass these parameters you have here. So it's gonna be, what is it? January, Friday here. It's gonna, I don't know if this thing is an L or an I. L. Friday, right? What else we said? May, and we're gonna then do the number of the day. So these are live, by the way. What?
I think it was there as W. Oh, you got J there. Okay.
Yeah. No, but I'm looking, I don't remember if the ordinal is here. Doesn't matter. So I can say today is Wednesday, May 2nd. I think we have ordinals here. Yeah, we have them. Yes. Yes. There you go. So again, what I'm going to show you, it's not a master degree on how to format dates with templates. What I'm saying is that any logic that you have to make in templates, it's not going to be so simple to code it with the regular Python code. You will need to rely on these template tags and filters that are provided by Django. By the way, you can create your own. It's a little bit complicated, but you can create your own. And again, philosophically, the idea is not to put a lot of information in templates. Try to keep them simple. If you have something extremely complicated, try to move it to your views or another processing unit. Make sense? Questions? So, two things. I need to update the platform because we are updating the repositories a little bit. So the repo of tonight, I'm gonna send you all these two links right now so you can have them, and I will update the platform for later. But you have something to start practicing right now. You can try, of course, this in Cloud9. I could try showing to you. It shouldn't be really complicated. The first practice is all about writing views. So it's pretty much what we've done with a little bit more interesting views. I will try setting it up. Again, you can do it in Cloud9. It's extremely simple. Remember, you have this command that's going to be make run server. So you can, we are trying to simplify things for you a little bit until we see the internals of Django. So it's just make run server, it's going to work. You install the dependencies, make run server, and you have your server already working. So I didn't send the link after all. Did I? No. This one right there is the one with the practice. Questions?
So are you going to be removing or adding this in the resource link?
Yes.
Okay.
And in the platform, and there's going to be a new event, a new card showing this up. So I want to...
You said there was a second practice as well, or is just that one practice?
This one for now. The other one's going to be for next class.
Okay.
So let me verify everything should be working fine. Cloud9, same thing, basically with everything. I want to show it to you. So it also gets recorded. In this case, you don't have any apps, but basically your job is going to be URLs. Yeah. Make one quick commit live. There you go. So your job is going to be basically in the urls.py and in the views.py files. But let's give it an introduction. Come on, Cloud9. Okay. Was it that slow for you too, Xavier? When you were trying it today?
Yeah, it was pretty slow for me.
There you go. So we have the project. Let me see if it pulled the change that I made. Let me just make it here. And it's, as usual, created a virtual environment. It's going to be, I don't know, myam or Django. One, I'm going to call it /-p /user /bin /python3. Install the requirements. Make run server. And it says your code is running. We can access it right here, open the app. There you go, it's running. So for example, in URLs, we will need to go to authors and do something there. Right, build it somehow. And of course you can follow here. We need to build a new view that it's slash hello world. So here's gonna be we're gonna do hello world, and it's gonna be world, right? And it's gonna be something like this one. And if we reload, oh, by the way, it's hello world. There you go. We see it. So pretty much the same thing we're saying here. Make sense? Questions? By the way, you don't have a lot of template logic in this project to keep it simple, because templates, it's usually more about HTML than actual Django practice or Python practice. Sounds good?
Sounds good.
Yep.
All right. So give it a try. It's simple practice before next class. So you are not waiting, for a long time before start practicing and giving it a try. This is about practicing. Django is 100% about practicing.
Good.
All right, guys. Have a great night, a great afternoon for you, Mike. See, it's sunny there.
Yes, I'm ready for sleep now. But I'm moving into a new room right now. I'm at an Airbnb, and it's a crazy week. I'm sick of the cold. Yeah. Anyway, thanks.
All right, folks. See you later.
Good night. Thanks.
Bye.